Good day. This is Piquo Pie with the Everfree Northwest writing track, and we're going to do a bit of a pre-show here for 5 minutes or so while people are connected. We have for everyone a crack panel of Penstroke, Sounds Like Ponies, and myself. And then if you're watching the live stream, I believe you can see Light Solver, who's hosting it for us.
I'm actually looking at the stream. They cannot see him.
Oh, they cannot see him.
No,
Fantastic.
they just see our stretched faces.
Our stretched faces. Aw, the camera already adds 10 pounds.
Though it's like with all those introductions, it's like that's for when you're starting the panel. This is pre-panel. We're just being talky here, just so that people have something to listen to while they go foot about the internet and get the pony pictures. And I have to turn the live stream off now because seeing myself move on a delay is messing up my mojo.
Fair enough.
So, what is the subject of pre-panel that can last 5 minutes?
But not really any longer. Well,
how was everyone's day?
This way. What have you been reading?
What have we been reading? Oh.
Never learned how to read.
Wait. Then how do you write?
Magic. He speaks into one of those thingies and then he sends it to other people.
Oh, also, Pico.
Yes.
There is a person scratching at my leg. His name is CouchCrusader, and he wants to crash the panel.
He wants to my internet just let's see, CouchCrusader wants to crash. CouchCrusader, is he crashing from a couch?
I do not know. He just poked me in the Skype chat of Doom, which is the PM, since PMing is always Doom to some degree. Varying degrees. There can be very little Doom, but there's always a little Doom.
You know, let's go for a few minutes and then we'll have him join once we get started.
And it's like he's watching the stream and he's just chatting me back. Funny.
Like, yeah, well, is CouchCrusader still doing stuff with Equestria Daily?
He's the one that made our post.
Oh, he is the one who made the post. Well, then, darn it, CouchCrusader, you have trumped us.
Oh, his butt in here.
Yeah, toss it in.
Wait, now he's saying no. CouchCrusader, make up your mind. Make up your mind.
Maybe he found some more couches to crusade. No, Couch. We would be okay with having you for dropping in this one time. This one time will allow someone to jump in.
Because he's EQD and he's made the post and the thing, so I will.
No, it's more the CouchCrusader. I want to say that we actually have him. Do we have him coming to Everfree Northwest? My internet is slow for some reason.
Well, you're streaming and getting video from 3 people, even if you can't see it.
Well, no, I can't say we got that fixed. Remember?
His plan is I got a response back. That's the plan for him to be at Everfree Northwest. So
yes, and yes, okay. So we have contacted. Oh, that's what it was. He hasn't decided whether he wants to go to Everfree Northwest or not and contacted me. I know I've sent him a message.
Well, you can harass him during the panel. It's like, what's your decision? What's your final answer? Is that your final answer? Doom, doom, doom. Wait 5 minutes to actually get a confirmation. That is all right. Well, then I am.
So feel free to add him. Yeah.
All right, CouchCrusader. Watch this. He won't pick up.
Probably.
Do.
Wants to show video. Yeah. There's CouchCrusader.
Or let's fight on for me. Fight on. And thank you, CouchCrusader. You actually killed the 5 minutes and perhaps gave some people something to laugh about. But we cannot hear you. Your headset is not functioning. Hello?
Nope.
We hear nothing.
Nope.
We see you sticking out your tongue, but we hear
It-
nothing. So yeah, everyone,
Our ethnic diversity is muted.
Couch Crusader is going
We're
to
gonna have
join
to
the-
do ventriloquism.
No, he's going to be a mime. He's going to be a mime. Yes, that it has been decided.
Well, how about we do this? Since it is 7:30,
We can start.
how about we start the panel while Couch Crusader desperately tries to break in and crash the panel? Even though he's half crashed it. He's like got his foot in the door and he's just so nervous he can't talk. Nope. Nope, you're just making a fool of yourself.
We just see you smiling and going, check your Skype options. Make sure it's using that microphone. But still, Piquo Pie, on to you.
Yes.
Get rolling. Get it rolling.
So, good day and welcome to Everfree Northwest's first pre-con panel on this fine April 26th. As people know, Everfree Northwest is one of the largest Brony conventions, and we have one of the best writing panels around. Everfree Northwest occurs over the July 4th weekend. Today we'll be talking about setting, and then next month we will have another pre-con panel on plot, and then in June we will have another one on character. And
then it will be time for the real con instead of the pre-con.
And the hope is to have them exactly 3 weeks apart, so that third week from character we'll be starting the starting the convention. Okay, so each episode we are going to have a couple of guests, and we'll probably try to have pen strokes for all of them, since he has been so kind to us in the past.
Right.
But generally we're going to try to have some revolving guests, and they're all going to be guests that are attending Everfree Northwest, except for maybe Couch Crusader. We don't know yet.
Well, I'm trying my damnedest to make it out there.
And he has speaking.
Okay.
And apparently
Good
it's like
sound.
he told us in Skype, it is the doom of a dead battery. And
Well,
that
maybe it deserved to die.
Also,
It would be
Pico,
wireless, but
Pico, I am going to correct you again as I did at Everfree last year.
stroke.
Yes,
hang on.
there
Is
is
it
no
Pico
plural.
or Pico?
I'm sorry, I'm dyslexic. I've been getting better. I have actually been practicing. Anyway, so we have Penstroke, who is the fine gentleman who has been berating me, and he's authors of such things as Past Sins and Better Living Through Science and Ponies. We also have Sounds Like Ponies, which is going to confuse me because that does end with an S. So it Sounds Like Ponies, who's the author, find you a date. Sounds Like Ponies, do you want to say hi?
Hi.
That was short, sweet, to the point.
And Couch
Pretty much
Crusader,
what I
who's
do.
been kind enough to help us with an EQD post last minute when we couldn't contact the other person, has been nice enough to join us. And let's see what stories he has written. I know that I've read one of them, but he
they're
is
all
also
garbage.
they're all garbage. Wait, aren't you EQD pre-reader or involved with the writing of EQD?
I just knew the right people to threaten.
Okay, so we have Couch Crusader, who's
pulling up his fanfiction page. We have his featured stories, including Sunset Shimmer Has a Problem, Wingmares, and Via Equestria, which is 3 of his 7.
God, 2 of those are incomplete.
Oh, the pain, the pain. Oh, also to
you know what I have.
to
No.
staff that is reading the chat stream to be sure to grab any questions for you from the chatters. So,
It's a pretty good idea.
Okay, so let's start with setting. So setting is a very important part of a lot of stories, but oftentimes it tends to be overlooked. And unfortunately, right now my internet is deciding to throw sound at me that I cannot mute because it is evil.
Well, that's why we have headphones.
That's the problem. Is that it's coming through the headphones. There we go. Okay. So
Like,
sorry about that.
you guys can't hear it, but it's driving me nuts.
Pretty much. Okay, so when you get to setting, a lot of people just think it's the location. Like it's the dark and doomy castle. It's the it's the weather. It's the dark and stormy night before the mystery. It's a sunny day. It's a castle. It's a city, and that's all involved in setting. But one of the big aspects of setting that people don't realize is the culture and the people behind the world. You see this a lot when you're looking at people who are writing about foreign places. So, for instance, in Harry Potter, in America, Harry Potter was kind of unique because we didn't really get a lot of very British stories. We might get stories that have someone who's got a British accent or a Scottish accent or is from some English-speaking part of Europe, but we don't really get involved with the culture as much. And so in America, when we read Harry Potter, we see stuff and we're like, oh, this is such a cool, interesting, fleshed out world. And half of that is because it's written by a British author, J.K. Rowling, and she is British. And so she's just writing her normal stuff and what's normal for British culture and maybe expanding on it a little bit, but it comes off as so much more. And one of the really cool aspects of setting is that when you flesh it out, it really helps your story in so many ways that are hard to identify at first.
And to add
One
to
of the-
that, another thing that can come into setting that we can discuss later, since we are going to be focusing on the cultural aspects a bit more at first, is how the way you describe the setting, the narrator's voice when describing the setting can instill in the words itself a sense of the setting. So,
Yes.
but that we'll talk about later. Piquo Pie, you may continue with the culture things.
And so my degree is in psychology, so I see a lot more culture when I read stories than I do the physical description of the world. You get some things like one of my friends has a story about sky pirates, and I'll look that up here in a second. But the thing is, when you're exploring a world and you're going to different places, especially with adventure, which a CouchCrusader might be able to talk about, you have it can also offset itself. So for instance, if you're trying to write in an accent, you might be trying to write a southern accent, and if you write it too much, you might have them written as AH when they're saying I, because they're saying I with an accent. Well, if you're writing a Scottish accent, you might be writing ah. It might be more gravelly or something like that. You might be going for a different sound, but when you write it, it might get confused. So,
and some people truly despise the kind of written dialogue things. Like I get away with it occasionally on Applejack, but some people liked Twist better after reading a few of my stories because I don't do her lisp, because that drives me too bonkers to try to think words like that for writing.
and so you have to be careful with accents in particular, which is actually something I'm planning on working on for a video and a how-to kind of intro guide. But
Piquo.
yes,
First off, it is Piquo, right? Or is it Piquo?
pie, yeah, like pie company pie.
Okay, so yeah, maybe this is something we could also like discuss if you're gonna have a dialogue panel coming up, like either during the convention or like in one of the later streams too.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a good option, something we might want to add. But the basic part of it is that setting includes accent, it includes mannerisms, it includes culture, buildings, it includes the weather and the climate. And so when you're talking about setting, you have a lot of things to keep in mind, and you might be good at some things and need to work on others. So it's something that's good to keep in mind. So we haven't heard from Sounds Like Ponies very much yet. So Sounds Like Ponies, what are your let's start off by maybe identifying what people identify as their strengths with setting. So let's start with Sounds Like Ponies.
My strengths are everything. As far as setting, I mean, there's a couple sort of hacky things I know from just my exposure to media, books, games, anything, any storytelling kind of media. And there's sort of a set of tools you develop over the course of you learning how to do storytelling. One of the big ones for setting and this can actually be extended to any kind of descriptions, is called the rule of three, which is that things just feel better and work better when there's three of them. And so if you go with just either one thing, that's normal. Or if you go with when trying to describe a setting or set a scene, a character, anything in the world, if you go over detailing three things, you're probably pushing it. That's something pretty important to keep in mind. It sort of ties in with the idea of look at the lay out all the things you could describe, take the best and cut the rest.
Because some of it does need to be left up to the reader's imagination. Otherwise, it's just like Bob Vines, which is a newspaper man from my hometown, told me about one story where like the first 10 pages are describing a snowy forest with a guy standing in it. First 10 pages of a particular novel, a best-selling novel, because some people like that author's particular style, but it's like 10 pages of nothing happening but the snowflakes drifting, and it's like just complete musings on snowflake and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the aspects of when you're writing setting is, and you'll hear this a lot in the pony fandom, you need to always show, never tell. CouchCrusader might be efficient way of getting something through when you're talking about a.
They're asking me to be in the kingdom.
They're asking you. They are apparently someone's asking my roommate to be in the
Hang on
camera.
a second.
Haha. Fixed.
Do I know the
That'll be a
guy sitting
second.
next to you?
Yes, it is Alt Tap. You actually met him at Everfree Northwest, which is a great place to meet people. When you're writing setting, a lot of times it's better to tell rather than show. I mean, think of some famous lines. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. That's from The Tale of Two Cities, and I've never read that, but I know that line. It is a very, very famous line, and I can't remember her name. One of my friends on FinFiction did a post about how a lot of the best intros start off tell because you're conveying a lot of information about what's going on in the world and the setting starting off, and you're trying to do it quickly so that you can draw people in. You see this also with oh God, who wrote The Hobbit? I'm terrible at nouns.
Tolkien.
Tolkien, yes. I just started reading the Lord of the Rings series, and he starts off and he's talking about just the culture of the hobbits. And this is, where the hobbits come from, because the hobbits, they're not humans. And when you're talking about something that's not human, or that you're sharing a culture that people aren't as familiar with, adding extra things like that can be very interesting. And if it's something that's unusual, it will still hold the reader's attention. So if you're including things that people like, oh, that's a really cool idea, or like in Star Wars, the first time, even in the movies, the first time they go super fast through space, it draws in the viewer, and in the books it draws in the reader.
And it's just like I actually, the commenting on the setting is like you just it's okay to definitely like try to get some facts across, and it's like the setting can be a bit of action in itself. If you're using the setting to describe a town under siege and whatnot, you can use compare and contrast to kind of show what it was and what it is now, and that can help kind of set the mood and set the atmosphere, set the setting for how bad things are. It's like the bakery where there used to be fresh buns is now just rats and moldy hay or whatever.
One thing I actually learned through Dark Souls is that environments and settings can tell a story. Like with Dark Souls is just this ruined world where everything's sort of gone to hell a long time ago, and like the entire world and all the ruins and every bit of the environment tells a story. And you can do that with settings. You can use a setting to tell a story of what happened in the past.
And you see that a lot with film as well, where like a blinking light or a light that's swinging, especially in some of the older films, would indicate that something's about to happen or that something's not quite right. And in writing, what's actually sometimes useful is to draw extra attention to how normal something is. So if you draw something normal to just how friendly everyone is, and if you do it enough, it becomes unnerving. Just like in real life, if everyone walks around with a smile and greets you with a high five, or is super nice to you in a town, it can feel very weird because that's not the culture that you're from. So by making something seem excessively normal, you're making it different, which can really set the setting that something not right is happening.
And that can go further in that the culture and the setting can become one of the obstacles that your protagonists need to surmount just because of the differences. For example, because Netflix is wonderful, I've been streaming shows and I've been kind of slowly digesting Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one of their
Ooh, I just finished that.
one of their most recent one of their more recent series. And the episode I just watched recently is Crash Landing, and there's a colony with no technology and kind of a back to the roots of farming whatnot mentality. And that's all. It seems all well and good. It's just like these people have been surviving, but as the episode goes along, the head matriarch um, of the community is slowly kind of making the protagonist abide by the culture to an extreme sense, where one of them spends a day in their could only be described as a hot box, as an attempt to break him and make him integrate with the community.
Yes, and when you're getting to when you start crossing a little bit harder, like when or mediums, like when you start getting film, like in My Little Pony, there's this, especially when we started season 2, we're like, oh my god, they did so much extra work to make the background more interesting, and there's more buildings and they're more detailed and there's extra stuff going on. And hey, look, here's a reference to something in the fandom because Bon Bon and Lyra are always sitting together. That's stuff that's not necessarily written in but is still added. It's really hard to do that in writing when you're trying to have something going on but you want to show something in the background. And so that's something that you see sometimes more experienced writers do. But back to the point, the pen stroke.
It is something you can totally do in writing. You
It
do it through inferring things. And like I was saying, with environments that tell a story, you can have other things that tell a story, like just the state of a town, or I mean, you can have characters that sort of have reading in between the lines tell more of a story.
Or perhaps here's just a quick line thrown out. It's like, and you can kind of get an example of what kind of setting this creates in your head.
Well, no, hang on, Penstroke. Why not use an idea from your? Let's use an example from like one of your stories on how you've used setting to that end.
But I was gonna use an example from Everfree Northwest 2 years ago, because one of the writing challenges from the the original Everfree Northwest Iron author challenges, because they do that whole you have 2 hours to write a story, was the story needed to feature a clock tower. And there was a bunch of stories that used that clock tower for a setting, but by exploring different aspects of it, they were able to get very different moods, even though it's still just a clock tower. And while I don't remember those examples, an example that you can think of right now is, think of a clock tower that is in a state of decay. Usually in communities, especially the ones for the kind of level of technology we deal with ponies, a clock tower is kind of supposed to be an important thing. It's what everyone sets their time to. But if the main clock tower is broken, if like the hands are frozen at a particular hour, that can be a sign of the state of decay in the town, or it can even be a part of the issue, kind of like the best night ever.
Time is frozen.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. You can also have things like the sun can be behind the clock tower, and so it can cast a shadow at an opportune moment to highlight something that you want. Maybe someone's down and the clock tower goes over them, or maybe the sun appears from behind the clock tower and you realize maybe you can do something that you wouldn't be able to before.
I am remembering National Treasure in that moment with that comment. It's like the shadow of the steeple casting a line at a particular time on a particular brick to get the next clue and whatnot. That's more plot device and setting, but a comment from the stream from Speedyard Ban is, the setting is a character in its own right, is it not? And that's definitely a way you can think about it, as the setting can be kind of the overall average of the character of the town's people, because it's like, what is a it's like unless the setting is it's a ghost town where there's nobody, and in itself is that as a definition of the setting. It's like the mood of the people, the state of their lives, and all that stuff. That is an aspect of the setting, and it's kind of a way for you to kind of give everyone an impression of everybody's life sucks, everybody's life's good, everybody's kind of getting by, or anything along that spectrum.
Hmm.
And I mean,
And
bringing all of that out partially comes from, like if you're just describing setting, if you don't have people and you're trying to achieve a certain mood or atmosphere with your setting, then usually that comes through with diction and how well you can spin sentences to set a mood.
And kind of it does actually lean to what vocabulary you use. The tone the narrator takes can lend to what is going on. If the narrator is using grander words to describe something, it gives a grander sense to it. But if you're using simpler terms, like say it's like using simpler terms, it can lead to a more simpler sense of what's going on. It's like if you're using the biggest, grandest words to describe a farmhouse, that's one stinking impressive farmhouse. But if you're using word like quaint or calm, or just like just the way you're flowing your sentences can kind of even give a sense of, is it rushed or is it slow? Is it dangerous or is it safe?
hmm
And that all links to
um,
that.
and something that's kind of interesting for that, for those who have read it, is Fallout Equestria. And this also goes back to the environment can be a challenge, or the environment can be a character. One of the reasons why people love the Fallout Equestria universe is because there's this very detailed setting, but one of the reasons why KCAT is able to describe it so well is because you spend a lot of time just wandering the wastelands. And so what ends up happening is you have time to expand on stuff, or when they come up and maybe there's a raider camp, you can describe the setting before you get there. But if you're in a city, a lot of times, you're walking through the city, then if you have something happen and something pops up, it can be a lot harder to fit in the setting because they turn a corner and then something happens. Well, if the setting matters, you have to describe that, but at the same time, you still have action going on. And so you see a lot of writers will work into kind of how the world works, maybe kind of a wandering mentality, or they'll work in spots where you can describe stuff without interrupting the rest of the flow. And so when you have setting and you're trying to describe it, if you're focusing on it more, it's a little bit more acceptable to have it more in a character type description. But when you have it more as it's augmenting action, it can get a lot harder to describe.
Just to speak really quickly upon Fallout Equestria, I honestly do believe that the story's success is inextricably linked to its setting. The very fact that it's so immersive and that it resonates so strongly with the experiences its readers have found in common with the game series and all that is what propelled it to such success. You could argue the same thing happened with It's a Dangerous Business, that classic from Jetfire back in the summer of 2011, because he was able to realize the settings of like Gildedale and the Archback Mountains, the Forest of the Deer, and all that. He made that place seem so real in our heads that we just wanted to keep exploring that world outside of the 2 weeks that we had for the story and all that. So I feel like it's been a really long time since the fandom's really had like any stories with like such resonant settings, and
Well,
it's quite possible that I'm out of the loop here in that regard too. I'd be
it's
happy
not
to be proven
entirely
wrong.
that there haven't been, it's that those stories sort of got in while there wasn't any real competition. Now things are sort of overwhelmed by just how many stories there are out, so it's
And also,
things don't grow to that size quite as much anymore.
Yeah.
and it's also the fact that we just know more about Equestria now than we did like back between season 1 and season 2. Equestria was still like this mysterious place that we hadn't like completely solved, but now it seems like everyone has a theory for everything. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Everyone has a head canon, but to loop back a bit to the discussion of Fallout Equestria, I think the best way is like the one phrase I heard that kind of really defines it well is it isn't about this. It isn't a story about characters interacting with the world. It's about the world affecting characters. It's just there seems to be that greater focus on that, and that's what sets it.
Yeah, and in a lot of the Fallout Equestria fan fiction, there's a big sense of the world is so oppressive and so it affects it knocks all the characters down. Like it challenges them so much that it's the equivalent of in real life. Maybe your job's hard, maybe you lose a job, and that will occupy your thoughts for maybe half of your day until you find a new one and you can get back to securing your ego yourself. Sorry, I'm a say psychology
What
bachelor's.
economy do you live in where you can get if you lose your job in the morning, you can get a new one by the afternoon?
Believe it or not, I could actually do that, but that has to do with never mind. No, there's certain jobs that like if you lose your job at a tech company, you might do what I do, which is security, and I started with event security, which is you call up, they say they have something, and you go and you do it. And so if you don't know what's coming up, you don't know where your paycheck's coming if that's all you're living on. So it occupies a lot of your time and your thoughts. And so in that sense, like if I was writing a character about that, or a story about that, the setting and of the job would be a huge defining factor of me as a character, because it is oppressive and it's thought consuming. And so when you want to show character, interacting with setting is a great way to do that because it's something that you can start relating and showing how people are different. Because you might relate to a character, but if they act different in a situation that maybe is similar to something you've experienced, now you can understand, oh, they're a little bit more like this. Maybe, they're more of like a Canterlot elite. They're a little bit more snooty. Maybe they're a little bit more of like Applejack, where they're like, it's about hard work and it's about getting it done. And by showing a trigger in the setting and in the world, you can have the character react, and so you can expand upon character, and then you can have the world react, and so now you have this back and forth between character and setting, and then you can work in plot, and now you have this very interactive story where your people can make connections. And one things people love with stories is to be able to make connections between what's going on.
Having the aha moment, it's like aha.
Yes.
It's like one of my most recent ones. I had people kind of go running around in circles trying to figure out what going on was Wise Be 100 Years, where I was doing conspiracy, and it's worse. It's like with all the red herrings that are involved in it, and it's just like there are the aha moments. It's like I know it's wait, that's wrong. Ah! But it's
You're
like
an evil author.
I don't
No,
think I don't think there. I imagine people would agree with you for different reasons.
Yes. Go ahead.
Don't you knock that off, Cat.
Well, I mean, I had something and I lost it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I talked over you.
It happens, especially when
No. It was actually something to the end of yours, and then I lost it.
So we've talked about different ways in which you can use setting to write a story. You can interact with character and plot. You can set up the aha moments or reveal them. But one other thing or a couple other things that are, or one of many other things that are good is like having a consistent setting. So it's one thing if you have a story that's all dark. It's another thing if you have a story like Past Sins, where at different times it feels completely different. And so then this is an analysis of your story, pen stroke.
I've got my dukes up.
So what ends up happening is you end up having to take moments to redefine it. And a lot of times you still want to keep it consistent because like it occurs in Ponyville, like there's the moon, there's the nightmare moon, and then there's the post nightmare moon, Ponyville. And so you still have this consistent world, and it helps when you're borrowing from an existing intellectual property. But if you're trying to create different feelings, you have to keep going back and addressing stuff. And so now you have the point where that bakery that was a thriving bakery and then it was covered in rats. Well, now maybe ponies are living in it, and maybe it's become a place where
it's become a Starbucks.
It's become a Starbucks, or it's become like an orphanage or something. And so you have an evolution of the setting, which can be.
There's a good episode for that, even though it's kind of like it has the resetting tendencies of, oh, the episode's over, everything's fixed. Is the one where Spike gets greedy. I forget the proper title of that one. Any help here? Anyone help? Spike gets
Secret
straight.
of your excess?
Thank
Or
you.
secret
Yes.
of my excess, yeah.
Yeah, that one.
Pronouns.
It's like part of like Spike the part. It's like the setting becomes a major thing in the very last bits of that episode because it's like Spike is holding his claw up to one of his giant footprints and he's seeing all the destruction and it was like we see that being used a lot as a trope. I think in the series is that Ponyville getting wrecked and then having to rebuild after the wreck kind of gives a sense of the community's resilience almost.
Master carpenters in that town.
And probably very high insurance premiums.
Highest in the kingdom.
I kind of picture them more as being Amish in a sense, like, oh, that barn got destroyed again. Well, let's come together and have a Thursday afternoon and get some food and set up
Raise
another
that barn,
barn.
raise that barn.
Yep.
There's a song for it.
Yes, there is, in fact. Probably what made me think about it. But when you get an evolving setting, you get a lot of. I mean, you've all seen the recurring. The character holds up the foot or the hand to the giant footprint in the ground, and then it's like, oh, it's a reveal, but it's also references to size, and then you're like, well, this giant footprint's in concrete, like that's crazy, because you're basically doing an imprint on rock. And so
which leads to not just size, but that's usually the set. That's usually the setting being a foil for the character, just like the character can be a foil for the setting. It's like reflective foils.
You do see a lot of reoccurring things. You get the maybe when things start going bad, the lights start flickering. You get certain reoccurring things that they're almost a language of themselves in writing, because what ends up happening is people can make a reference to the light flickered on and off, and now you don't need to write extra things for readers to get the meaning, because it's so established that the flickering light is something's going on someplace. Maybe if it's in the middle of a battle that there's shelling going on, or maybe it's that there's an earthquake happening and the lights are flickering on and off because the power plant is having issues. And so there's certain things that have become really common, and they're a very expansive aspect of the language in writing that you don't see as much or you see in different in movies and TV shows and pictures, but in writing it into its own language.
To pull from a comment on the live stream, just to prove that we are looking at you guys, we had a Lord Elliot. That's how I'm going to pronounce it because there's no spaces. It's like an inconsistent setting could be used to create a certain tense or feeling of insidiousness. And fail. Oh no, call fail. We lost Pico. Doom. Check. Who else is here? Who's still here?
I'm not.
I think I am. Barely.
Okay, yeah, we lost Pico. We will continue on, and hopefully he'll get his internet fixed. And he's
Can't kill me that fast.
Pie. Piquo Pie.
Turned into a horse.
It was like I was reading Lord Elliot's comment, and it's like that is exactly what we were just talking about, where the changes in a scene can be used to kind of give a sense of something is not right. Like, for example, even just as the last line in a chapter, commenting how something you described early in the chapter is not there anymore, or how something moved back to where it was previously. The whole moving dolls trope is a horrible thing because it gives a sense, the sense of creepiness it can create.
Well, the dolls are creepy sometimes. Like if you've seen some of the movies out there, it's like, so when you're working all this stuff together, you have to keep in mind not just what you're intending, but what people can take from it. So if you move a doll, you could just have that to say you have a mother and a daughter, and the mother moves the doll to clean, and then the daughter gets freaked out because the doll has moved. You might be intending it to come off as, the
child's being silly.
The child's being silly, or the child's just being a child, doesn't necessarily understand that there aren't monsters. But at the same time, if you're actually going for something creepy is happening and the doll moved, but you just had the mother cleaning and moved the doll, then it can be missed by the reader.
Or it could just be construed as a red herring from them. It's like, wait a minute. Is that supposed to be important or not?
So it's always good to have free readers and people who you go over the story with, because a lot of times you can set something up that you don't mean to. You might have a reason for a character to be angry, or for a building to be having structural problems, but at the same time, the way that you write it might be misconstrued. So whenever you're trying to elicit feeling from setting, it's always good to have, at least I recommend, 2 people reading it over. But if they read it over and then go back, and if you're kind of unsure, or it's a very important part, you might want to ask, does this make you feel like, that something is coming up? Does it make you feel like there's something else at work here? Does it make it feel like, maybe that doll isn't just a doll? So it's always good to get multiple opinions, and that can help make the setting more consistent in plot and character too. But with setting, it's really easy to overlook the effects they have from different people, because you also get, back to the Harry Potter reference from earlier, you can get it to where in the first Harry Potter, it's kind of a dark setting. He lives in the closet under the stairs. Well, in a lot of British writing, it tends to be a little bit darker, so that's a little bit more normal. But for like someone here in America, it comes off as very dark, because we don't ever show that really in American literature and American shows, unless we're pointing out that this person's life is utterly terrible. And so when you're doing setting, try and get points of view from people from different cultures where the story might be from. And when you're talking about the My Little Pony fandom and fan fiction, it can be hard, because there's a large Russian group of readers, and in Russia, they tend to spend more time translating English stories over. And so you start getting things like, what you mean as dark in America might come off as something a little bit more normal over there. Not, that Russia's dark or anything like that, but
It's just there's
how
something
things are explained.
There's something lost in translation.
Yeah, and even if you're not translating, different cultures in different places can cause, and different common experiences can cause that problem. So if you're going beyond just a fandom, and you actually want to be a writer, and you want to write for something that might be an American written, for instance, you might want to get opinions from different people. That was a little repetitive, I'm sorry.
Also a little edgy. I think your internet's grokking you
robotic.
again, but yeah. We're not hearing a lot from you.
I'll try and close some stuff, see if that helps.
Still, sounds like CouchCrusader, talk. Because Piquo Pie and I are stealing so much of the time.
Well, a lot of the examples we were talking about are stuff I've never read. But
well, then pull examples.
I guess something I'd like to talk about in terms of setting, which.
Well, no, as I was going to say, pull examples from stuff.
I tend to use more general talk than examples.
Who to answer?
You do that, I'll add pen.
Sounds good. All right, so I guess I'll just kind of go in order and be as quick as I can. This is a lightning round, I suppose. So got a question from Madness over here. As a new writer, I've been having a lot of trouble with how I've been building the setting of the story. Is it more important, clearly describe the setting, or allow the reader to imagine? And I would say that it's important that you do both, but only give the reader enough of the setting so that they can start building on it themselves. You don't want to bog down the pace of your story by describing the exact texture of the cake Sunset Shimmer is currently enjoying in Sugar Cube Corner. There is absolutely no reason to go into that at all. Let the reader fill in that detail for themselves and just keep on running with it. Next, who wants to answer Razalon's question?
The win setting and characters are essentially one and the same. Should you lean more towards one or the other when writing for it? That one?
Yeah, sure. I'm actually kind of curious about that. What do you mean setting and character are essentially one and the same?
I think it means when the setting has an influence on the plot. It would until he types in otherwise. That's what we're going to go with.
Or else the trees are alive.
I think when there's like a strong sense of atmosphere and presence in terms of just like the atmosphere and tone of the setting is almost like another character in the room. And I think to achieve that sort of effect, for the setting to be like a character in the first place, you already have to have, I think, a fair amount of focus on it. I mean, just like a character who is barely mentioned in a scene, they aren't going to have a lot of presence in the scene. So how much focus you put on the setting will determine how much character it has. But I mean, also how much character it has can be determined by how well you use your words.
I would
And how-
also say that it has a lot to do with how important it is for the plot. If you are trying to create a good, like a certain feeling, then the setting might be more important. If there's a challenge in front of the characters, then setting might be more important. But if you are just trying to have the characters do their things in a setting, then the setting would be less important. It does tend to matter more when you're creating a new and unique setting. Like if you're just in London, you can describe the basics of London. Oh, you're next to Big Ben and it's so tall. There's a Ferris wheel across the way that is interesting. Um, uh, you don't necessarily have to focus on it as much. But when you are creating a new setting, especially in sci-fi or fantasy, people need to know the difference between the aliens in other worlds and yours. They need to know the difference between orcs and elves in your other world and yours. And if your world is different, you need to highlight that for the most part. Uh, and that will, because if Pegasi in your world are seen as more important than the other ponies, for instance, the reader needs to know that because it's affecting the characters, it's affecting the plot, it's affecting everything. And so that's really when you need to highlight it, is specifically when there's difference between what people will be expecting and what you're doing.
Okay. It looks like actually, with regard to Razalon's question earlier about like setting and character being one and the same, it turns out that the universe to be the sapient entity also playing a role in it. I'm not exactly sure what to do there. I've never really had to deal with a story
then
that kind of
then
scope
the
before. It's just another character at that point.
yeah, it's just another character at that point. There
And
isn't
they
much.
have different abilities, different viewpoints than what some of the other more restricted characters might be. I mean, they could certainly do more than a pony, make a star go supernova, I don't know, and all that. So, let's see, what else do we got here? This is an interesting one from Lord Elliot. So obviously, how do we deal with things that change in the show as time goes on when writing our fanfics? So for instance, like the whole changeling revelation in season 2 just completely rewrote the history and I don't know, the population of Equestria in that regard and all that. And you could, and obviously like Twilight getting wings at the end of season 3.
I
stuff like
ignore
that.
them.
Yeah. Someone else
Yeah,
take a crack at that.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote.
Go ahead.
I wrote a story much later that just sort of disregards everything, even season 1 material, and it's just if you want to go alternate universe or whatever, something that disregards some canon rules, while still enough ties to it to be fan fiction, then do it. I mean, the main thing you don't want to do is you don't want to wind up half-assing something. Like you either want to go all the way with an idea, or not at all and just stick closer to the source material. You don't want to. If you go halfway, it just comes off a bit weak and uninspired.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to add to that and saying, obviously, like the show is just going to be adding more and more material to become canon as the seasons go on. I think if you make it clear, like either in the description of your story or within the story itself, that this particular story takes place, before cakes have their twins or something like that, then I believe that's a perfectly valid way of just like kind of setting your story in a particular time. I definitely have a lot of projects I would love to get back to working on, but they definitely predate season 2 in that regard. Something you don't want to do in this case is like, even with the alternate universe tag, you don't want to alter the setting, history, and characters to such a radical degree that you just have characters with names who just happen to share them with like Twilight Sparkle. And because there's absolutely no point in using the My Little Pony characters at that point.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things when Sounds Like Ponies is saying you don't want to go half-baked for changing something from the show, that's not to say that you have to focus excessively on it. A simple line sometimes is much simpler to address something. So if you still have Twilight Sparkle as a princess, if it's You know, the if it's right after a different episode, you can reference that without having to focus on it. And in a lot of ways, that's better because it's, you know, people will realize that it's not the end all be all of what you're writing. It just is something that happens to be. And so when you incorporate something tactfully and just a short line, you know, Twilight's a unicorn, make it clear that she's not an alicorn, that's not much of a problem. Now, what a lot of people have issues with is they'll be writing a story and literally, like, I'm going to release this on Monday, I'm finishing up the edits, and then the new episode comes out, and suddenly, like, the story, like, half of the story is invalidated. So if you realize that Twilight was going to become a princess, and you have Twilight doing stuff, and then suddenly Twilight's a princess, well, now you have...
Hello.
Hello,
Oh,
pen
God.
strokes.
Hey,
Ew.
hey, I'm back. Yay.
Ugh.
I think my router had an aneurysm, or AT&T decided, oh, you're doing too much. Kill.
Sometimes canon reaffirms what you're doing, though. Like,
Mhm.
I think I wrote about a Star Swirl, the bearded spell, ascending Twilight to being an alicorn before that was in the show. So
I can
occasionally good stuff like that happens. That's always fun.
I can actually jump in on that. In past sins, because it was written before season 2, I called the fact that Luna would be getting more celestial and like more adult and less little child at some point. So
And Sunset Shimmer has a problem. I totally got that Sunset Shimmer continue to breathe after Equestria Girls.
Yeah, I kind of wish actually that everything Equestria Girls would focus on her and ignore Twilight Sparkle, because I think they have a real character to build from for that and to explore the world with. But when you are... I lost my train of thought. It died.
It's okay. We can move on if you want. All right,
We have a question from Perry Planet. Perry Planet Ban.
oh God, John, get away.
Out of curiosity, how much real world inspiration do you guys like to incorporate in your settings?
I think that really depends on what setting you're trying to do. It's like if you're doing a Manhattan setting, then you may pull more from like modern urban settings than you would. But for Ponyville, you may take more examples from like classic medieval.
And then with the farming with Applejack, you might take more examples from a farming setting, even if you're not doing anything with the farm. You just want to have a consistent setting in that sense. A lot of times you have people doing, like, they're going for a Scottish or a French feel. They tend to do it more with characters because a lot of people, you know, will try and write for... they want their writing to sound French, but they haven't been to France, and so they don't necessarily know the culture. And that's one of those aspects where knowing the culture matters a lot. So you do get a lot of people who take inspiration from images and they'll try to explain it. So for instance, if you have a decrepit castle in the middle of a lake that it's just a rock with a small little keep on it, you might create a world explaining it, and that's what I tend to see as more successful. It's not to say that there's not other ways to do it. Obviously there are, but trying to explain something in the real world in your setting is a great way to establish what it's similar to, but also in what ways it's different. And so that's something that I have seen sometimes work a lot, and that I have done to limited success. I don't really go outside of Ponyville for my stories as much.
I
As
think
far
what.
as my personal
Go ahead.
sorry, as far as my personal answer to the question, how much real world inspiration do I take for my settings? None. I live in my head, so I mean, I just sort of take my inspiration from whatever other fantasy or non-fantasy books, movies, shows, games I've read and watched. And I mean, I guess it's like high-level story writing because I'm just writing my stuff based off of other written stories. So,
Well, you
God,
gotta.
when does it end?
Yeah, those bootstraps have to end somewhere. I'm so glad that Perry Planet asked us this question, because there's nothing writers love doing more than discussing their own work and all that. So I tend to be drawn toward like the bigger adventure stories. Some people might remember A Fire on the East, where I tried and failed to like expand upon the dragons living next to Equestria. in that regard, like I don't really use like a whole lot of real world settings in my writing. I would have to say that the one exception to that is also the one story that I happen to have completed, I guess, and I'm actually most proud of. Uh, a lot of the settings in Wingmares, which is a story I ginned up about like how I think Fluttershy and Rainbow Dash met each other in summer camp, were based off of my memories of heading off to like Camp Woodruff when I was a Boy Scout in 5th grade. Like the scene in the dining hall in chapter 2, for instance, was taken directly from my recollection of the cafeteria, like right there by the lake in that instance. So in that regard, I think it's really important that even if you are like trying to generate like this big high fantasy adventure story or whatever, it's important to just like kind of get out and see as many places as you possibly can, so that you can just let your subconscious grind on those, and they might show up in your stories in wonderful and unexpected ways there.
And a lot of things you also see is people taking from other works. One of the one that comes to mind is if you've ever seen the movie Blade Runner, the world with the city-sized buildings. You didn't see that as much before Blade Runner, but afterwards, you can. I've seen several movies, TV shows, even role-playing games that take directly from that imagery that they use. And something that's interesting with that is I want to say it was Hong Kong uh, had a big problem one year with smog. Like there's no wind getting rid of the smog. There is smog coming in but not leaving. And when they took aerial photos of it, it looked like Blade Runner. And so sometimes you have instances where when you're trying to write for the future, you're taking a modern setting and you're changing one or two aspects, like adding a lot of smog, and suddenly the setting changes dramatically. It's not this big bright city, it's this dark city that all these lights stick out. You can't quite define the buildings, but some of them are massive, and it can be very intimidating. And so when you're writing for if when you're writing real world settings that are kind of different, especially when you're writing for the future, um, taking what they have and changing one or two things and then exploring that can be better than constantly trying to make more and more and more changes.
It's like, hang on.
There's
Oh shoot, I'm I'm watching the live stream right now, so I'm watching Piquo's mouth moving and nothing's coming out. That's because I had the stream on mute, and well, anyway. I don't know if we want to loop back on this question Cypher asked, because I think it's a pretty good one to ask in that regard, about like keeping us, like how do we as authors like keep ourselves from going overboard with setting details, and what techniques do we have for elegantly injecting elements of those setting into dialogue or characters?
I have an explanation for this, but I will let everyone else go first because mine is minimalistic.
Well, I think I already described the whole thing I do is I just think about this when I'm trying to describe a setting or whatever. I don't go over 3, and that keeps it pretty limited. I actually do a lot of my setting and building and atmosphere and other stuff through dialogue and character action. And the way I wind up doing that usually is I just have discussion focused around it. You have, topics about the world or whatever come up naturally in the characters' dialogue as they're talking about things.
To bounce off that, one of my techniques I like to do is like making the environment part of the action. So it's like if you're going to have two characters talking, it's like you set the stage, you let them talk, but then you have them doing little things that helps break up your dialogue, but also kind of helps set what's going on with the scene. Like, bakery, sunset, Rarity's talking to Pinkie Pie. As they go, Pinkie Pie's like putting away the food that's going to be sold as day old for the next day. She's sweeping, she's taking out the money from the change drawer. It's just a bunch of little things that kind of give that sense of it's kind of the end of the day, winding down, talking to a friend because the shop's closing and it's slow and all that kind of. It's like actions can speak to the setting as well as allow you to bring the setting up again, so you're not trying to shove it all at the beginning and then go talk action.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Penstroke, like right there. If you're not going to have your characters interacting with the setting, then there's absolutely no reason why they couldn't be doing the same things inside a limitless white void. That instance. Another thing I like to do when it comes to weaving setting into my narrative and all that is trying to engage different senses if I can. We talk all the time about like showing, not telling, putting an image into the reader's mind, but I think it's also important to like describe sounds, describe textures, describing smells, especially smells. We all have seen that Old Spice commercial where they say that scent is the strongest sense tied to memory. It, like done right and with the right details dropped, you could unleash something very poignant within your reader to the point that I was in Florida like a little while ago, and just like the smell of the air coming out of the air conditioner just like kind of took me back like decades when I was like in fifth grade going on summer camp. It was a really neat moment, like right there, and it doesn't
Yeah,
take up all that much space in your story if you manage to do it right.
And the thing about setting in terms of what to say and what not to say is that that's partially something you develop over time as you get reader feedback, but also that, like, okay, when it comes to sort of putting some sort of setting or world building or anything like that into dialogue or into narrative, as long as you are giving the reader lots of information with what you're writing, it doesn't matter if you're also raising more questions. Like you can write something that has a sentence with a lot of information that also raises a ton of other questions, and as long as the reader feels like they're constantly being given a lot of information about the world and the setting, the fact that you keep raising more questions doesn't harm that at all. And I mean,
And
Well, I think it's more important that you keep the questions to like an appropriate level. You don't want to dump everything on them all at once.
it's like something another used for it is kind of a little bit of like stream of your primary character's consciousness. If you're doing a story where you can kind of, you're using a perspective where you can kind of get into the character's head. This is the style I tend to use as third person omniscient. It's like you take a paragraph where the narrator kind of steps right behind the character's head, and it's like the way they think about a setting can also kind of be a way of describing the setting in and of itself. It's like if you put the six of our favorite main mares in a room, what is each one going to notice? Rarity may notice the dusts. Applejack may notice some nice old family pictures. Twilight may notice the books. Pinkie Pie may notice the lack of confetti.
Who notices the cough? Sorry, reference to a
That'd be
really old fic.
Fluttershy. Like, oh,
Yeah, it's like
someone-
shit.
Oh my.
Or and Rainbow Dash just notices this is just an old room. Why can't we go back outside where it's fun?
So I have a completely different approach for when I'm writing setting. And that's that I look at when you write, you're writing from specific perspectives. You can mix and match them. But for instance, you can have a character-driven story where the plot reacts to how the characters would act in the situation. Or you can have a plot-related story where the characters need to do certain things to move the plot forward in a certain way. But you can actually have a setting-driven story where you see this a little bit more at the beginning of Tolkien when he's explaining the hobbits, and it's interesting and it really works best when you're describing something that's different. And I found out that I was doing this when I was writing the story I'm most proud of, which was T the Tiniest Troll, where I'm describing a troll in the forest that um ends up coming into Ponyville, and it's like, oh, these ponies are pretty cool, life is so much better here. But I'm describing it as an epistolary, it's through letters, the princess from all the characters involved. And so what ends up happening is you have different characters describing the same different perspectives. And so you're describing culture, you're describing the environment that people were in. Like, it's so much brighter here in Equestria than it is in the Everfree Forest. Well, I don't just say it's brighter. I have the main character T actually is hurt by the light. It actively bothers him and it causes him physical distress. So when you're writing a story, try and have a consistent perspective from how you're writing it. Are you writing it more of a story that's progressing a specific plot in mind? Or are you trying to show all these cool, interesting characters? Are you trying to explore the world? And you can mix and match them, but you want to have it a little bit more consistent. And when you change setting, you might focus a little bit more on that. But in how you explain it, because you can explain the setting from a plot perspective, it's the rocky crag was dangerous to can be dangerous to climb up, but you can have also explain it from a character setting. Fluttershy is afraid of trying to climb up it because it's unstable, whereas Rainbow Dash, who's very secure, it's like, it's a little rocky, but it's fine. And so the perspective that you come from can be explored to show different things.
So I'm going to double check with the other panelists here real quick while we have a pause. How long were we intending to go with this? Because
We were intending to go about 9, so
I think we got about half an hour. We got about half an hour.
Just wanted to be sure. Just wanted to be sure because if it was supposed to be 8, we're a little past that.
No. Most of our panels at Everfree Northwest are an hour and a half, and I kind of wanted to stick with that. There's some that are shorter.
Makes sense. I just wanted to be sure. Wanted to be sure.
All right, we got a question from Obsolescence. Not setting related at all, so I don't know if we need to answer it. Well,
are there settings? Are there setting related questions we could answer before his question?
There's another one asking what our favorite examples of setting in Ponyfic are. Should be pretty easy, quick to answer.
I would have to say it's like I always bring up this story when I'm thinking, but it's just like it's one of the fun stories that's always kind of stuck in my brain is a story called Tilt, where Trixie is a pinball wizard, and like the pinball machine is such a part of the setting that it's kind of like it's the end, but it's the piece of furniture. I always like to bring up that story, which is a shame because that author I think has disappeared from fan fiction for about 200 weeks or whatever that count is.
I didn't actually hear the question. My audio cut out.
What is your favorite setting in Ponyfic?
Fall Equestria.
Well, that was easy.
Yeah, it's really easy because it's a unique setting, and there's different stories that occur in it, and it's really easy to have other stories that don't want to be as dark go into it because they're borrowing from someone else's intellectual property effectively. And that's something else we can actually talk about if people want, is to how do you distance yourself from an existing intellectual property. Actually, I guess we kind of have talked about that a little bit, haven't we?
What do you mean?
Well, when you're highlighting differences, if you're using existing property ponies, oftentimes what you want to do is highlight the differences between the world and yours. Or if there's something that's unclear, like I want to say in some My Little Pony episodes, there is like a stream or river going through Sweet Apple Acres, but then in official source material, there's not supposed to be one. And sometimes there's not. So it's one of those settings that's really weird. So you want to highlight that difference or that inconsistency. Right. Yeah, pixel or Pinstroke is getting way pixelated. It was just looking like a disco ball for a second.
I don't know. Can we
Am I better now?
Yep.
Can we hear from Sounds Like for a little bit about like what his favorite setting in Ponyfic is?
There's only one story that really struck me as having great setting, and that's probably Knight's Favorite Child.
Yes.
I've heard of that one. Who's it by?
Can't recall the person. I think they've only done that.
I will look it up. You keep talking. I will look it up.
But it does this really amazing job of leaving a lot of things sort of in the dark that you discover about how the setting has changed, that you discover as you go along with the story. I mean, the setting has changed from what canon is. I mean, the whole idea is that instead Nightmare Moon won and Twilight winds up becoming her student, but Twilight is also like... Is that a spoiler?
It's in the description. But
you're also just making me think of Twilight Revised by Vimbert over there.
But Knight's Favorite Child is by Municipal NGs.
Yes, it's a really good story. I recommend it too. One of the things that's interesting about it is that it's very obvious that it's different. That experience as a child is different from her normal experience that we've seen from the show, but there's a lot of parallels. And when you're highlighting the fact that in spoilers, that she's in an orphanage and is being raised as an orphan and then gets adopted. Basically, when the same thing happens at instead of the Summer Sun celebration, it's the equivalent for Nightmare Moon. But it's always night, and so there's always lamps, there's always stuff going on, and there's one part of night that's brighter and one that's not as bright to represent day and night, but there's only the moon. So when you're exploring it, there's certain details that are completely different from the world, and there's certain details that are very similar. And in that sense, it plays on what you know, and it also plays on what's different. And there's one thing about the human mind that we know is that people like things that they can relate to and that they know, and people like things that are different and unique. And when you get certain things that are both, it really helps people connect to it because the differences highlight the similarities. And Knight's Favorite Child did a really good job of that.
I was hoping it was okay if I could jump in with some of my favorite settings that I found in the fics I've read and all that. It's so hard to recommend just. I already touched on. It's a dangerous business. There's another one that came out back in like 2011 or something like that too. Moonspire Run by Titan Rising. I'm not sure if that rings a bell for any of y'all. No?
I'm gonna have to admit no.
Barely.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Basically, it's like Rainbow Dash and Spitfire get into a race to touch the Moonspire, this ancient artifact left over from the days of Nightmare Moon. And the way that they negotiate the obstacles on the way over to the Moonspire speaks a lot to how Titan Rising developed his theory of Pegasi and flight. It's a really cool. Excuse me. It's a really cool read, about like 15,000 words long. Not that long at all. I'm also a big fan of the Moonstone Cup, which I believe Cyanide wrote, and something that I've fallen behind on, regrettably, but gonna try and catch up to that this weekend is Through the Well of Pyrene by Ether Echoes. What's really great about that and the Moonstone Cup is that both of those authors really kind of go outside of Equestria and bring in different civilizations. Like you have Cyanide bringing in the Diamond Dogs and the Dragons. And with Ether Echoes, he just goes off like making Equestria's version of goblins and other mythical creatures, bringing in like Norse mythology. And it's this wonderful melting pot I found that could have really...
Well,
that isn't really worth reading if it weren't for like how well he blends all those settings together.
And one of the things to highlight about the Moonstone Cup with that is that in the My Little Pony show, they incorporate a lot of mythology into it. And when you're writing a story and you use the same type of inspiration, you get a story that is very similar to an episode, but is still a fan fiction. So when you're saying, draws from Norse mythology is explored a little bit in My Little Pony, and they draw from it, but it's done so more here, and so you get the same feeling that, oh, hey, it's the same kind of world. It really does feel like it's adding to the canon versus adding to the fanon.
Cool. Dead air.
Cool story, bro.
Dead air. Dead air.
Oh God, help. What about going about writing a good world-building story? Fantasia, you're gonna need to clarify yourself a little bit on that.
Well,
we could literally go anywhere with that.
Well, yeah, it's like maybe the way we can go is like, how do you spread world building across an entire story? Because I think that may be a story as a world builder is you kind of keep building up the world as you go through until when you're at the very end, you've built a world house or whatever metaphor you want to use for construction.
A big thing about that is pacing. So depending on the story that you want to write, if it's a very action-oriented story, you're going to need some pauses between the action. One, so that your readers have a chance to calm down, but also it lets you explore the setting more. Traveling is a great way to do it. Also having something that's a little routine. I want to say, what was the story that was the prequel to the Platinum Crown?
Best Night Ever.
Best Night Ever. There's this great part in Best Night Ever where, and this is not a spoiler, where Blue Blood has his drink. It's the drink that he always have, even when things are getting dark and he's basically going crazy. There's this one drink that it's him, and he wants it to become really popular. And so when you have something that's consistent to fall back on, it's something that really helps ground a story. So you see it in like Star Wars Episode 1, you have kind of when Anakin and Obi-Wan they visit like a little stall to get some fruit from. But it becomes obvious that that's like a regular stop for Anakin. And so it adds to this world of the community, and it makes you feel like, these people are interconnected, and it's just a little short 30-second part of the movie. And so you can use things that are similar. You can use things that are consistent in daily life activities. If you want it to be a little bit slower fic, and if you have a more action-oriented fic, I find when you stop and take a breather and have a character specifically go around and explore it, that tends to work a little bit better.
Food is actually a pretty good one for that. There's
Yes.
there's certain authors who use food in particular ways. One is George R.R. Martin, another is Quentin Tarantino with his directing. If you watch Quentin Tarantino's films, he has like the best use of food in an eating scene in any movie ever. Like he makes food into plays of power and into characterization and other things absolutely absurd. But yeah, and then George R.R. Martin, the food is it's a way to sort of ground all the fantasy into these people still stop and eat and still have to stop and eat.
And the different areas have different foods and different ways that they approach eating it too.
Like,
Yeah.
for instance, if you want to become mother of horses, you must be able to wolf down that horse heart, still bloody and raw and everything. Go to Daenerys.
Yeah.
A little bit more PG there, CouchCrusader.
But our example is just
Sure.
if a culture has super spicy food and it's like everything they eat is spice, just because like that's just the nature of it. Is like a meal that makes the people leave the table because they have to go dunk their heads in trough is a compliment. Like
But
like
the spice
burping.
must flow.
Yes.
Here, an example from history actually would be the Romans used to have a place called the vomitorium, which is in the city you'd have a celebration, and it's like, oh, it's the celebration, we'll eat all the food, and then they go to the vomitorium and they remove the food from themselves, which is why it's called the vomitorium, and then they go back to eating, and that speaks a lot to how opulent the culture was in the city and what they valued, because it's
the latest Catching Fire movie actually used that, where it's like offering the champions more food. It's like, oh, I couldn't eat another bite. Oh, drink this. What is it? It makes you. It's like it's like they're
that you can eat
throwing
more.
that. Yeah, they're throwing up food while we're starving. It's kind of like that kind of.
Yeah, and that's something that ended up being very shocking and spoke a lot to the setting, but was taken directly out of history. And yeah, it was things like that can be very interesting.
There's this interesting question from Fantasia, and I'm interested in like prodding it a little bit more. So, like, what about writing a story about the history of Equestria, how to make it good, that kind of thing? And really, I want to answer that question with a question in the first place, because what do you want your reader to come away with having read your version of Equestria? Maybe like you three can jump in on that too. I know someone will.
Well, it's like that was partially the kind of the idea behind Wise Beyond Her Years, was I was completely twisting the history of Equestria around a single thought that came up, that was hit me during a VA panel at the last.
Don't die on us, Ben.
Send help.
At the last, because it was the last one that they had, and it was the last one they'll have ever of EQLA. And it's like the one thing is, like, you have to try to make sure that there's a central plot you're trying to follow. Otherwise, you get into a habit of making it a bit too much like a history book. If you're just wanting to lay out like, oh, it's like this happened in 936 before 900 or 36 after the fall of Nightmare Moon, or it's like you have to try to find that plot line and then let that plot line kind of lead you around the different aspects of the history. And sometimes you won't get to aspects that you think are really cool, but you can it's like the fact you're thinking of them lets you use a fact that may not see the light of day in the story, but it can still facts that'll come into light, and it leaves something for the reader to deduce from other clues.
There's actually a story that I think is really good, not necessarily about showing the history history, but it shows how you can do it. It's called Cry for Eternity, and I'll include a link right here. And I actually edit and pre-read for it, which is how I found it because it was asked. And the excuse me, the author starts each chapter with X many years before, spoilers, Twilight becomes princess, and not really spoilers.
Wait,
That really
what?
haven't. So, Cry for Eternity is a story about Celestia dies but leaves her everything to Twilight, and that includes being a princess. And that happens in the first chapter, so it's not really spoiling anything. And then it's how Twilight deals with it, and it goes a little bit back, but mostly forward in history, and they include different timestamps. And at a certain point, the timestamps will change to X many months to years, and then it's going to go on to decades, and so on and so forth. And the story does a good job of setting in that at different points it comes back to the same theme. So you have the themes that happen before Twilight becomes a princess, and then you have the same thing will be addressed afterward, and you'll see how it evolves. And showing when you're doing like a history setting, if you want to spread it out more, you can readdress the same thing. So maybe you have the Night Guard, the Bat Ponies, and maybe they were integrated as part of all the uh, all the other ponies, and then you might go to a different period in time, and you just might mention the Bat Pony City and how they're. Excuse me for a second.
Oh,
Bless you.
actually, an interesting setting that I saw someone bring up that was kind of related to Passings and whatnot was a way of describing how it's like the Bat Ponies weren't Bat Ponies; they were dragon hybrids, and that in itself creates a whole setting in of its own of what kind of world leads to a need of creating
Give me a second, guys. Sorry.
a pony dragon hybrid. So.
So it's about 10 minutes until 9 o'clock, which is our target endpoint. So we're gonna go over and we're gonna do some wrap up thoughts. And what I think would be nice
I
is if we
never
said,
really got to say anything on the topic of that question.
"Oh, go ahead."
Yeah,
For the history one, I mean, history. If you're just trying to tell history itself, that's not really a story. There's a famous author whose name I can't remember currently, but he said the only story worth writing about is the human heart and conflict. And like, if you want to write about history, you first have to figure out some sort of human conflict that occurs during that history.
which is a nice
And
thing
that's
'cause
where
history
a
is
compelling
generally
story comes from.
and that's nice because generally history is full of human conflict. So because
It
it's
is.
like
Those are the parts that the history textbooks usually don't have in most cases because they don't go in depth. They just skim the surface.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to go history, you want to go in depth into the characters of history. You don't want to just write your story for the sake of telling like an interesting headcanon. You want the headcanon to be supporting a story.
yeah. So for example, perhaps the headcanon you want to explore is that Starsworld the Bearded is somehow was related to the rise of Discord. Maybe he became Discord. Maybe he was the one that like drew Discord out of the ether of chaos. It's a bunch of other things. Then it's like the conflict that can become the driving point of that is what reason did he have to do that? What reason drove him to eventually do that, or how did he work with the princesses to try to deal with the aftermath of that said event?
So I think we addressed that. So we are getting to the point. We might continue a little bit afterwards, but I wanted to wrap up with the one cool thing that people have about writing that they want to share. And I know Penstroke and I have added stuff. And if Couch Crusader wants to write in the Skype chat his email, I'll give him access to the master document so he can write his one cool thing to wrap this up with, and let him find it. Penstroke, do you want to start off?
Sure. So I'm going to assume that Light Solver is going to throw up the first image I linked because that's actually the one cool thing that's actually writing related that I'd want to share. But I'm not looking at the live stream because that was part of the reason why my router had an aneurysm. But it's like that's a funny caricature of what we commonly see of like the plot rising and falling and whatnot. Is that roller coaster picture, and it's like if someone looking at the live stream, can they tell me if that roller coaster picture is up?
Yes.
Yay, okay, so it's like the roller coaster picture, you kind of get a sense of the setting it's like what the setting generally is for the story, but it's just as important because the roller coaster is the plot and the people on it are the characters. Like that's what's important, and that's where all the action is, but the setting is what is supporting it, is the backdrop to it. It's the thing that gives us all context of what's going on. And so then just the picture that caricatures.
Caricatures.
Thank you. Thank you. For, it's like I thanked you for mocking me. But it's like it's like I found that picture a while back, and that's always something I like to share when we're on the subject of writing. But yeah.
Okay. And then one thing that I want to highlight is the School for New Writers, and I'll copy that link over here in 1 second. The School for New Writers is a film fiction group founded by Pegasus Klondike, and one thing that I like about it is of all the film fiction groups that focus on writing, they take a school approach. So you have the professors, you have the administrators, you have students, and people can post there with, but they've selected certain people can post, so you're not just listening to a random person who might not know what they're talking about. It's people that they generally think at least have an idea of what's going on. And so there's a lot of people will keep looking up and bringing up months after they're posted, which is really nice. You also don't get inundated with lots of little things, and they do have activity. And I like how it's organized because you have like a lecture field trip. You can have a field trip, which is you have to go somewhere else to see something. You can have a lecture, which is like it's a discussion about a topic, and you can have activity, which is interactive. So it's really easy to navigate and to find out and to explore.
So, Sounds, did you have a one cool thing you wanted to share?
I think I was just gonna mention the game I was working on and
Oh yeah, we had
link
that
the
YouTube
video of
link.
it or something.
We had that YouTube link.
Yeah, I've been spending the past 5 or so days coming up with a. I got sent off to a general framework for the stories. We were having trouble figuring out exactly what direction we wanted to go, so I've ship over it for now at least.
Tell us when we're live again. Okay, so everyone, the YouTube video from Sounds Like Ponies crashed everything, but that's not his fault. That's our streamer's fault, Light Solver. But I think it may be just best to show. It's like someone can throw that link into the chat, and then you can go check it out. Someone already did.
Yep.
Okay, so that's all good. So we've each shared our one cool thing, except CouchCrusader, but that's because he was a panel crasher.
Nope, just posted it in the chat right now. There's a link to the editor's omnibus right there. It's got a whole bunch of links at the very top to offer you resources on getting feedback on your writing, as well as just trying to figure out how writing works. I do believe that Easy End's writing guide is still very comprehensive, freakishly so, in my opinion. And we've got a table of contents that the pre-readers don't actually use, but it's definitely a good starting list of issues you need to look out for in your writing, ranging from the mechanical to the character to anything related to like story or content and all that. So hopefully it might be of some use to you folks out there.
Mm-hmm. And so we're going to wrap this up. Thank you for joining us. We will have another panel next month on plot and one in June on character. You can follow us. We have I'll include some links here. We have a Facebook page. We have a website. We have a film fiction group and a film fiction profile where we post stuff up, and we include every Thursday we include some story recommendations. We also have coming up, of course, Everfree Northwest. So thanks for joining us, Everypony, and how about everyone say their own goodbyes?
Not it for first. Someone else go.
As they say in Canada, peace out.
Peace out. That sounds like peace soup.
No one's joining us, CouchCrusader. They already went. Anyway.
Wubba-lubba-dub-dub.
I just want to say, I hope as Piquo Pie said, I'll probably be on each one of these panels, so I hope to see some of you later and bring friends and whatnot. And
And we
I
will
will- I
have
will-
a video put up after the fact.
Yeah,
on
Oh
and-
what
God,
it is.
I did not sign up for this.
You
You d-
you crashed it.
I was acting on incomplete information. Bye.
No,
Why did he?
Uh,
Why did he crash?
I have no idea. He crashed the panel, and I guess he didn't want a video put up afterwards, even though we
Oh,
talked.
Oh no! Oh no! He's immortalized in the interwebs.
Well, EQD EQD folks can't have their images shown because their souls might get stolen.
At 30 frames per second, that's a lot of soul steal.
Oh my God, he's back.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate the time you guys have spent with us. Hopefully, we'll be a little bit more convincing in person at Everfree Northwest in July, and that you will enjoy our company once we are all out there. We definitely look forward to seeing all of you, and hope that we were able to help you folks in some capacity tonight. We really appreciate you sticking around with us.
Have a good night.
See ya.
I just don't know why I did that.